Hi, I'm Beauty and the Bustle, and today I'd like to share with you some late 1870s or natural form era gowns from my CDV collection. And I'd like to start off by showing you these two ladies here. And these ones are actually dated 1876 on the back, which is really good because unless you know which details to look for, it can be very difficult to date a gown to a specific year. So having the date on these is really, really good. And you can see that both dresses are fairly close fitting. They're a good example of the beginning of the natural form era. And the lady on the left here, you can see, has got a beautiful gown on, which is kind of like a polonaise overdress, which is buttoned down the front. And she has a velvet band going around the edge of the overskirt, and also matching bows and bands on the cuffs of her dress. And as is quite common in the late 1870s, hairstyles starting to become more pared down and less elaborate, and women tending to use less purchased hair or chignons, and using more often, increasingly so, their own hair. Whereas in the early 1870s you see an awful lot of very large plaits and chignons, very full and elaborate hairstyles. Still see the occasional one in the late 1870s, but generally they're more pared down. And if you look at this lady here on the right now, you can see she's still got the plaited hairstyle as seen in the early 1870s. The only difference is that slightly smaller maybe, and started placing the plaits and the chignons a little further back on the head. If you look at her dress closely, you can see the detail, absolutely beautiful detail of this elaborate soutache braid trim on the bodice of her dress there. And also she has a matching pocket hanging from her waist, and it's got the same soutache braiding on it, and it has matching lace to her bodice, and it's hanging on a little clip from her waistband, although you can't see the clip in the picture. It probably would have been like a little chatelaine clip. And what's lovely about this picture too is that you can see she's got her hands in a little trinket or jewellery box, and it's quite a unique feature actually for a picture of this type. I don't know what it is that she's holding in her hands. Maybe it could be a little bonnet or something similar. And looking at the neckline of her dress, you can see the ruched detail. She's wearing a little lace jabot with a clip. Looks like she might be wearing a pendant of some sort as well. Beautiful detailing. The ruched sleeves match the ruching on her overskirt. It's very heavily ruched and gathered, and then it's bunched up in a tight little bunch at the back of her skirt. This detail was seen quite a lot throughout 1875, 1876, as the skirt started to narrow and as it moved into the natural form era. You can see the matching cuffs, which are pleated, and the pleating on her overskirt. Still got the popular black velvet bands on the edge of the overskirt and on the cuffs of her dress, as were often seen, especially during the early 1870s. Very, very common feature to have these black velvet bands on dresses. And I suppose they weren't always black, they could be other colours as well, but quite a common feature. As you can see, she only has a very small bustle there at the back, or perhaps a bustle pad or small lobster tail. If I show you the next two now, you can see here a good example of the transitional era. So this one here, again, she's got quite a narrow skirt, doesn't appear to have much of a bustle. But going on the design of the dress, I would date this to 1875 or 1876. the asymmetric design on her skirt suggests that it's around this era. These asymmetric designs were seen, they started to be seen around about 1874, 1875, but became more common during the late 1870s. And this skirt, although it's narrowed down, it's not really tightly swept back, so it does suggest it could be about a year earlier. Her hair, she has lovely coiled plait and ringlets, still very much reminiscent of the early 1870s, although placed a little bit further back. She was wearing a beautiful lace jabot, which is pinned with a brooch. Beautiful, beautiful ruffly sleeves, which look like they're 3/4 length sleeves with lovely lace poking out at the bottom, little bows at the cuffs. And when you look at her skirt, it looks like on the side there that she may have either a little decorated pocket or a parasol pocket, which you started to see around about 1876. Sometimes slightly earlier, but mostly from about 1876 onwards. Her dress does have quite a lot about it, which is more reminiscent of around 1874, 1875, but I would date it to between 1875 1876. So very early natural form. This lady here, by contrast, you can see the difference, and this lady is wearing a dress from the late 1870s of the natural form era. You can see why they call it the natural form era, because really there is absolutely no bustle there whatsoever. It's possible she could be wearing a very small bustle pad, which they sometimes did in the natural form era, but you can see how it's just very, very form-fitting, and then just goes down pretty much straight, and then we have the beautiful train at the bottom. And the trains in the late 1870s especially were very elaborately pleated a lot of the time, with lots and lots of knife pleats and ruffles, and really the majority of the decoration seemed to move further and further down the skirt. If you look at her waistband, you'll see, or her waistline, you'll see that she's got a chunky chain with a little watch pocket there. And she, again, has got the very pared back, very plain hairstyle of the late 1870s. I would date this one to around 1877 to 1879. That sort of time period, because of how slender the gown is, and it's a princess over gown again. And these princess gowns became common in the natural form era, and it's got a little bit of pleated detail at the lower skirt there with the bows over the top. Lovely, lovely example. Next, I'm excited to show you these two. These two are exquisite examples of late 1870s. And both of them have a lot of detail on their skirts. Firstly, this lady here, she has a separate bodice and skirt. They look to be decorated very slightly differently, actually. She has the bands, what look like satin bands, on her cuff and on the bottom of her bodice. Little tiny watch pocket again on the side of her bodice. Lace jabot at the throat, very pared back hairstyle, and as you can see, the skirt is close fitting, and as became quite common during the late 1870s especially, the skirt is decorated differently on the front as it is to the back. And you can see on the side there she has like a little panel which is separating the two parts of the skirt. This started to be seen again around 1874, 1875, where the front of the skirt was decorated differently to the back of the skirt, but it was also seen increasingly so in the late 1870s. If you look at the bottom of her skirt, you can see really tiny, tiny, close, narrow little knife pleats all along the bottom. you can see these lovely ruched bands, sort of pleated bands that are sort of tied together in the middle with bows, and they have fringing. Lovely example of natural form era skirt decoration. Close fitting form again, with possibly a small bustle pad or something like that, although we can't see the back clearly, but again, very form fitting. And this one, oh, absolutely beautiful. Such an exquisite example of late 1870s. And if you look closely at her dress, you will see that she has buttons going all the way down the back. Absolutely lovely example. Whether these are functional or whether or not they're there just for decoration, it's hard to tell. And she's got the matching buttons on her cuff as well. Absolutely beautiful. Again, pared back hairstyle, which is classic for late 1870s. And she has a lovely polonaise overdress on, which is ruffled at the back, with elaborately designed vertical and knife pleats. Very, very, very tiny little pleats, which form a beautiful ruffle effect down the back. And these knife pleats go all the way along the bottom of her polonaise overdress as well. And her underskirt has the matching knife pleats on. As you can see, there's like at least 2 rows there of these exquisitely tiny little pleats. And the back of the skirt, once again, is decorated differently to the front. As you can see, the train of the skirt has ruffles, which are bound with bias binding. Just an exquisite example. And even the parasol pocket has these lovely little matching knife pleats on it and bow. Absolutely lovely example of the era. It's one of my favourites, actually. Moving on to the last two now, and these two, again, beautiful details on them. Starting with this lady here on the left, you'll see that she has actually a higher hairstyle, more reminiscent of the early 1870s. You can see she's got a large plait in her hair, and then the sides of her hair swept up over the plait. She has a separate bodice, an overskirt and an underskirt. And if you look at the way the skirt is pulled back, again, it's got this small bunching at the back there. And the skirt and overskirt are matching these beautiful matching gathers with a ruffle at the bottom. Absolutely wonderful. And if any of you have seen my ivory ball gown, again, it's very much inspired by gowns of the early to mid 1870s. My ivory ball gown was actually designed based on gowns from around 1874 to 1875, and this gathered trimming was very common around that time, as you can see here. So this one, it doesn't have the carace bodice, which is where the bodice comes down lower over the hips. This has a shorter style bodice. So this one, I would say, is really a transitional era one. It's possibly 1875 to 1876. You can see the skirt is narrowed down. The bustle is very, very small. But it's not yet as tight as it becomes later on in the decade. So yes, this one's around 1875, 1876. And if you look at the collar she has on, she has a stand-up lace ruffled collar. Again, that was sort of common around sort of the the mid 1870s, really, around 1874, 1875. But it's a beautiful example of a gown moving into the natural form era. And this lady, lastly, on the right here, another beautiful example of the natural form era. And again, if you look at her up close, she has got still a big hairstyle. It's not as big as some of the ones in the earlier 1870s, but The difference here being you can see that she's placed the chignon further back on her head, which is more classic for the late 1870s. And again, like any rule, there's always exceptions to a rule. A lot of women wore more pared down hairstyles in the late 1870s. But this lady has obviously got quite a large hairstyle still. And that does obviously happen sometimes. We find that some ladies just preferred it that way. But again, in true late 1870s style, she has it placed further back. And she actually, interestingly, has a little fringe. And that did become more common towards the very late 1870s, especially in the early 1880s as well. But yeah, less commonly seen around this time, so quite unusual for the era. She has a beautiful, beautiful separate bodice and overskirt on. The bodice is a cuirass bodice, which is form-fitting, comes down over the hips. Again, typical of the later 1870s. And I absolutely love the half-length sleeves on this gown with the roughly pleated or knife-pleated cuffs, very reminiscent of the 18th century. And she has beautiful bow around her neck and on the edge of her cuffs to match. And if you look on the lower skirt at the back, you can see she's got a matching bow there too. Look closely at her skirt and you'll see that it is got these large pleats and it's very tightly pulled back. So the fact that it's tightly pulled back and there's a cuirass bodice would suggest that this picture here could be anywhere from 1877 to 1879. I'll date it more around 1877, 1878, something like that. She has a very unusual trim on her bodice and on the skirt. Looks like a chenille knotted fringe of some sort. Very beautiful, lovely decoration. And around her waist she has a cord or a chain with a little slider to adjust the tightness. And hanging from that she has a lovely hand fan. Unusually, actually, for the time, this lady is wearing very little jewellery, and what jewellery she is wearing is quite unusual because she is wearing a pair of stud earrings. I've never seen that before in a photograph from the 1870s. You normally think of ladies from this era wearing quite large earrings, but unusual to see studs. And also very, very thin little bangle bracelets. So again, very minimalist jewellery that she's gone for here. But overall, I just think absolutely beautiful example again of the natural form era. So I hope you've enjoyed looking at these with me today. Please like and please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this in the future, and support me so that I can bring more content like this to you, and perhaps I can show you some more examples from other parts of the 1870s in future videos. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and also if you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, mostly historical dressmaking from the 1870s, please follow me on Beauty and the Bustle on Instagram as well. Thanks for watching. Bye.